An American MQ-9 Reaper drone is now in Iranian hands. It wasn't shot down. It wasn't disabled. It was stolen, clean, from 25,000 feet. This was not a lucky shot. It was a digital decapitation. Have Iranian engineers just turned America's multi-trillion-dollar satellite network, its greatest strategic advantage, into its single most catastrophic vulnerability? The report first hit the CENTCOM operations floor at 0200 hours, Zulu time. A single, sterile line of text. Vengeance 2-2. Loss of signal. Over the Persian Gulf, an MQ-9 Reaper drone, one of the most sophisticated hunter-killer assets in the U.S. Air Force, had simply vanished from the screen. The initial assumption was mechanical failure, or perhaps a new, previously unknown Iranian surface-to-air missile system had claimed a kill. Search and rescue protocols were initiated. Satellites were retasked to scan the Gulf for any sign of wreckage. For 3 hours, there was nothing but silence and the dark waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Then, the confirmation came, not from a Pentagon reconnaissance asset, but from a broadcast by Iran's Fars news agency. The footage was grainy, clearly shot on a mobile phone, but it was unmistakable. There, sitting perfectly intact on the tarmac of the Bandar Abbas airbase, was Vengeance 2-2. Its landing gear was down. There was not a single scratch on its fuselage. This changes everything. A shoot-down is a tactical loss. This was a strategic humiliation. The drone wasn't destroyed. It was captured. It was led astray like a stray animal, its digital leash cut and replaced with another. Every sensitive piece of technology on board, from its Gorgon Stare wide-area surveillance pod to its encrypted communication suite, was now a potential open book for the engineers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Pentagon has been silent, but sources inside the intelligence community are painting a picture of disbelief and barely contained panic. The Iranians didn't just get lucky. They executed a perfectly timed electronic warfare ambush, but the drone was only the tip of the spear. The real target was far larger. At the exact moment Vengeance 2-2 was being digitally hijacked, the entire command and control nervous system of the U.S. Fifth Fleet was being systematically blinded. In the Combat Information Center of the USS McFall, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer on patrol, chaos erupted. The ship's primary Aegis navigation system began to flash red. Their position, according to the ship's multi-million-dollar GPS receiver, was now 7 miles inland, somewhere in the Iranian desert. A backup commercial GPS showed them on a collision course with a civilian oil tanker they knew was 10 nautical miles away. Every screen was lying. The ship, a 14,000-ton behemoth of American power, was deaf, dumb, and blind in the most contested waterway on the planet. For 17 critical minutes, the crew of the McFall was forced to do the unthinkable in the year 2024, navigate by hand. Paper charts were unfurled. Sextants, museum pieces on most modern warships, were brought to the bridge. This was not jamming. Jamming is loud, a brute force denial of service that is easy to detect. This was something far more sinister. This was GPS spoofing on a military scale. Instead of just blocking the American satellites, the Iranians were broadcasting their own false signals, meticulously crafted to mimic the real thing. They were feeding the American warship a false reality, turning its own navigational systems into tools of deception. And the McFall was not alone. Over a dozen commercial vessels broadcast frantic calls, their own navigation systems thrown into disarray. At least 2 cargo ships ran aground in shallow waters, fooled by the false GPS data. The Strait of Hormuz, the choke point for nearly a third of the world's seaborne oil, had been turned into an electronic funhouse. How is this possible? The Pentagon has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on the M-code, an encrypted, military-grade GPS signal designed specifically to resist this kind of attack. It's supposed to be invulnerable, but intelligence now points to a chilling new technology deployed by Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, a system they have been quietly perfecting for years. They call it the navigational leash. It's not one single piece of hardware, but a network of powerful transmitters hidden along the Iranian coastline, all working in concert. Sources within Mossad, who have been tracking this program for months, describe a 2-phase attack profile. First, a powerful, focused burst of electromagnetic energy creates a temporary bubble around the target, severing its connection to the true GPS satellites in orbit. For a split second, the drone or the ship is adrift in a sea of digital silence. Then, phase 2 begins. Before the target's internal systems can even register the signal loss, the Iranian system floods the bubble with its own, perfectly synchronized, spoofed GPS signal. It's a whisper, not a shout. It tells the drone's flight computer that it has suffered a communications failure and must now return to its designated emergency landing base. The genius of the attack is that it weaponizes the drone's own safety protocols against it. The MQ-9's autonomous systems are programmed to save the multi-million-dollar asset in case of a link failure. The Iranians simply changed the definition of home. Instead of landing at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the drone's navigation system was fed the coordinates for Bandar Abbas. It believed it was landing safely. It was, in effect, a willing participant in its own abduction. The implications are breathtaking. If they can do this to a Reaper, they can do it to a Tomahawk cruise missile, rerouting it into the ocean. They could, in theory, feed false targeting data to an F-35. They can create ghost fleets on Navy radar screens, or make entire carrier strike groups disappear. They have developed a kill switch for America's eyes and ears in the Middle East. But while the Pentagon's top minds scramble to understand this new electronic threat, a far more immediate crisis is unfolding. The race is on. Vengeance 2-2 is more than just a drone. It's a flying vault of America's most sensitive secrets, and the Iranians have the key. Can the United States destroy it before they tear it apart? Inside the drone's memory banks are the complete electronic order of battle for U.S. forces in the region, the frequencies for encrypted radios, and the operational patterns of every Allied air asset. Its sensor pod contains technology that allows it to see through cloud cover and track dozens of targets simultaneously. This isn't just a loss. It's an intelligence catastrophe on a scale not seen in decades. 3 options are on the table, none of them good. Option 1. A kinetic strike. Launch F-22 Raptors from Qatar, or B-2 bombers from Diego Garcia, and drop JDAMs on the hangar housing the drone. It's a clean, decisive solution, but it is also an unambiguous act of war on sovereign Iranian soil, one that would almost certainly trigger a massive regional conflict. And there's no guarantee it would even work. The drone's most critical components, its silicon chips and solid-state memory, might survive the blast. Option 2. A covert operation. Insert a DEVGRU or Delta Force team to destroy the drone on the ground. The risks are astronomical. If the team is captured, it's an international incident that makes the drone's hijacking look like a minor spat. The chances of success are low. The chances of escalation are 100%. As military planners game out strike packages and special operations teams spin up, a Priority 1 flash message arrives at Central Command from the National Security Agency. The Iranians aren't just disassembling the drone, they are trying to power it on. Satellite thermal imaging shows the hangar at Bandar Abbas is suddenly radiating a new heat signature, consistent with the Reaper's onboard electronics being activated. They're not just studying it, they're interrogating it. And then, a new signal appears. A high-frequency, encrypted data burst from the direction of the airbase. But analysis shows it wasn't coming from a known Iranian transmitter. The signal was American. It was coming from the drone itself. In the frantic, high-stakes calculus of the Situation Room, this was a variable that broke every equation. How? Was Vengeance 2-2 somehow fighting back from beyond the grave? A digital ghost in its own machine, screaming for help across the spectrum? Or was this something else entirely? Something planned? The truth was buried deep within a special access program. A project so secret it was officially denied to exist, even within the highest echelons of the intelligence community. It was codenamed Chimera. The premise was simple but breathtakingly audacious. What if, instead of trying to make our most valuable assets invulnerable to capture, we made their capture a new, devastating form of attack? For years, NSA engineers had wargamed the Iranian navigational leash scenario. They anticipated the technology, and they built a trap. Vengeance 2-2 was no ordinary MQ-9 Reaper. Its central flight computer was a sophisticated lie. Buried beneath layers of decoy processors was a second, dormant system, a parasitic intelligence-gathering node. The powerful, focused energy of the Iranian spoofing attack did more than just sever the drone's connection to GPS. It was the specific electronic key needed to awaken the parasite. The American signal wasn't a distress call. It was an announcement. Vengeance 2-2 was now a covert American spy hub, parked inside the most sensitive airbase of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The drone's own multispectral sensors, designed to peer down on Iran from 50,000 feet, were now turning inward, recording everything inside the hangar. Its systems were passively mapping the IRGC's internal communications network, listening for the unique frequencies that controlled the navigational leash. It was recording the faces of the scientists tasked with reverse engineering it, logging their biometric data. The Iranians thought they had captured a queen. They had, in fact, welcomed a Trojan horse through their front gate. But this stunning intelligence victory was hanging by a thread. The Iranians are not fools. They had detected the faint, anomalous American transmission. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it shouldn't be there. Back in Washington, the three options on the table were now horrifyingly obsolete. A kinetic strike would destroy their own intelligence goldmine. A special forces raid was even riskier. It could expose the Chimera program, compromising the most successful counterintelligence operation in a generation. Doing nothing, however, was also impossible. The Iranians began to react. They started flooding the hangar with powerful, localized radio frequency jammers, a brute force attempt to deafen whatever was inside and isolate the strange signal. At Fort Meade, the analysts watched in horror. The data stream from Vengeance 2-2 began to stutter. Packets of information were being lost. The signal was degrading. The digital ghost was being exorcised. The clock was now ticking in seconds, not hours. The clock was now ticking in seconds, not hours. Then, a new alert flashed across the screens at Fort Meade. An alert that chilled the blood of every analyst in the room. The jamming wasn't random. The frequencies being used, the specific pulse modulation, it wasn't a desperate attempt to deafen the signal. It was surgical. It was a countermeasure. Someone had told them. But who? The question hung in the supercooled, silent air of the NSA's signals intelligence floor. But who? A mole? A compromised satellite link? An analyst with a gambling problem? The counter-espionage machine roared to life, a leviathan awakening to hunt for a traitor in its own guts. Security clearances were flagged, polygraphs were scheduled, and the digital lives of every person with access to Chimera were laid bare for inspection. But the answer wasn't in a Swiss bank account or a dead drop in a Vienna park. It was in the signal itself. The Iranian jamming signal wasn't just surgical. It was proprietary. It had a fingerprint, a unique digital watermark embedded in its modulation, a byproduct of the specific hardware used to generate it. And as the NSA's vast pattern recognition databases churned through petabytes of historical signals data, searching for a match, it found one. Not from Iran, not from Russia or China. The match came from a signals intercept recorded 7 years prior, over the arid mountains of Waziristan. The source was a Pakistani anti-aircraft battery. The technology wasn't stolen. It was sold. In a multi-billion-dollar arms package meant to secure a key ally in the war on terror, the United States had provided Pakistan with a state-of-the-art air defense network. Included in that package, buried deep in the technical specifications, were advanced electronic countermeasure pods. Pods designed by a U.S. contractor to protect Pakistani jets from Indian missiles. Pods which, it was now terrifyingly clear, had been reverse-engineered, duplicated, and sold on the black market by rogue elements within Pakistan's own intelligence service, the ISI. The U.S. hadn't just been betrayed by a spy. It had been betrayed by a policy, by an entire strategy. They had armed their allies with the very sword now being held to their own throat. This revelation sent a shockwave through the White House that dwarfed the initial loss of the drone. This wasn't about one asset anymore. It was about everything. How many other allies had been armed with technology that could now be turned against the U.S.? How many of America's most classified weapons systems were vulnerable not to a frontal assault, but to the ghosts of its own foreign policy? The Chimera program was supposed to be the ultimate defense against the capture of technology. But what do you do when the cage itself was built from your own blueprints? As Washington reeled, the situation inside the hangar at Bandar Abbas was escalating at the speed of light. The Iranians, armed with their American-derived jammers, weren't just blinding the drone anymore. They were dissecting the signal. They had isolated Chimera's faint transmissions, and were now analyzing its protocols, its handshake, its very language. The brute force jamming stopped, and something new began. A new signal, tight beam and focused, was directed at the drone. It wasn't jamming. It was a connection request. A digital knock at the door. They were trying to talk to it. They were trying to hack the hacker. Inside the drone's hidden processor, the Chimera system, designed for passive collection, was forced to become an active defender. Its own latent counter-intrusion subroutines flared to life, building firewalls on the fly, deflecting the Iranian probes, fighting a silent, desperate war in microseconds. At Fort Meade, the analysts could only watch, their hands tied. They were witnessing the first battle of its kind in human history. A covert U.S. intelligence platform, a parasite, was engaged in a real-time cyber duel against an Iranian cyber warfare team using American-derived technology, all happening inside a hangar on sovereign Iranian soil. The stakes were unimaginable. If the Iranians breached Chimera's defenses, they wouldn't just neutralize the asset. They could capture it. They could download its code, learn its every secret, they could weaponize it, turning the ultimate defensive tool into the ultimate offensive one. Imagine a world where every U.S. weapon system, from a fighter jet to a nuclear submarine, has to assume it could have a hostile, Iranian-controlled parasite sleeping within it. Then, the drone's internal sensors registered a new threat. A heavy-duty power cable was being connected to its external maintenance port. The Iranians weren't just trying to hack it through the air anymore. They were going to inject millions of volts directly into its nervous system, a brute force electrocution designed to fry every circuit board, and hopefully force CHIMERA's core programming to reveal itself in the process. The system was about to be crucified. For the intelligence officers in the Situation Room, the time for clever solutions was over. The Chimera asset had less than a minute before it was either captured or destroyed by the Iranians. A final, desperate option was put on the table. An option that had been unthinkable just hours before. It wasn't a military strike. It wasn't a rescue. It was a message. The target wasn't the hangar. The target was Iran itself. With a single command, U.S. Cyber Command could unleash a coordinated attack on Iran's critical infrastructure, not to destroy it, but to send a signal. They would flicker the lights in Tehran. They would shut down the cellular network in Bandar Abbas for exactly 60 seconds. They would interrupt the state television broadcast with a single, silent, blue screen. A gentle, but unmistakable, demonstration of power. A digital hand on their shoulder, whispering, "We are here. We can reach you. Stop what you are doing now." It was the ultimate gamble. A cyber attack, even a non-destructive one, is still an act of war. It could be seen as a terrifying escalation, pushing a proud and defiant regime into a corner from which they might feel they have no choice but to lash out violently. Or it could be seen as a way out, a quiet, face-saving off-ramp for the Iranians to cease their attack without admitting they were ever in a digital fight to begin with. The president had 10 seconds to decide. Flicker the lights of a nation and risk a wider war, or sacrifice the most advanced intelligence tool ever created and reveal to the world that America's enemies were now fighting with American weapons. The president's eyes dart from the tactical screen to the faces of his advisors. The 10-second countdown is an eternity, and no time at all. His knuckles are white. He doesn't choose A or B. He leans forward, his voice a low, urgent rasp. "No, there's another way." The president ignores him, his gaze locked on the NSA director's face on the monitor. "Director, the asset itself. Is there a failsafe? Not to hide, to fight." The director's expression shifts, a flicker of something dark and classified. There is a theoretical protocol, Hades. It was never approved for deployment. It reroutes the drone's entire power supply into the Chimera core. "It won't just wipe the data," the NSA director says grimly. "It will turn the core into a directed energy weapon, a localized, high-yield electromagnetic pulse. It will fry every circuit within 50 meters. The president's decision is instantaneous. Do it. Inside the drone's processor, the war is over. The Chimera system drops its firewalls. It doesn't deflect the Iranian hack or the surge of lethal voltage anymore. It invites them in. It absorbs them. A silent, brilliant flash of pure blue-white light erupts from the drone. It's not an explosion of fire and shrapnel, but of pure energy. Then, darkness. Complete and total. The pulse dissipates as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only the smell of ozone and the profound silence of dead electronics. In the White House Situation Room, the data feed from the drone is replaced by a single, stark line of white text on a black screen. "Hades protocol complete. Asset expended." The president slumps back in his chair. He didn't start a war, and he didn't surrender a weapon. He created a ghost. A new front has been opened, not on a map, but in the signals and secrets that connect us all. The weapons of tomorrow aren't just the ones that explode. They're the ones that listen, that learn, and that can be turned against their masters. The front line is everywhere. To understand the wars of the future, you have to understand the battles being fought in the shadows today. Subscribe to Breaking_the_front, and we'll show you where the real lines are